Hello again. How do I do these things? I usually think about what it is I'm going to talk about just before I start. And I think I do have an idea of what I'm going to ramble on about right now. I think I'm going to talk about language. This is sort of continuing a bit from the previous video in a way. Now, the whole thing about what language is and what it does to us is something that I picked up listening to Alan Watts. I do highly recommend Alan Watts. One of the things that he was very interested in was how we describe the world, describe our reality, and sometimes I think one thing he was really interested in as well was the concept of the I, or the ego, or the person. Like, who are you? And one thing that we have these days is if you go up to somebody and you ask them, who are you? You know, they might give their name, they might give their occupation. I mean, when you see on TV, on game shows, you know, they're always introducing these people, aren't they? The contestants. And so what do they use to describe the contestants? It's always what their name is, what their occupation is. And so as if this matters, you know, as if the name matters and the occupation matters. I mean, in the end, nobody's going to remember the person, and they're certainly not going to remember what their occupation was. But it feels like people need to be able to label things, and we need to label contestants, don't we? And so we label them. There we are. Name, occupation. We would have age as well, except that's rude. Age is only reserved for journalists. They always have age. It's when a crime is committed, for example, and there's some suspect, and they always just say how old they are. 37. It's like, I suppose this tells you something about them. They were 37. It's a bit odd, isn't it? I find it a little bit odd. But the point is the question, who are you? If I was to ask you that, how would you attempt to respond? Someone asked me, who am I? I would say, my name is. I don't like to say, I'm Dino Dini. It's like, I'm not my name, but I have a name. So if it helps, I'll tell you what my name is. But that isn't who I am. And your name isn't who you are either. So I think I'm going to be going into a little exploration of the concept of identity. And it's connected with language. If I'm already changing the topic, I don't know. Because it's inevitable, isn't it, that when you try to answer the question, you know, of who someone is or who you are, labels will be used. And labels are language. Because language is really just a classification system. We use it as a means to communicate concepts and ideas and to indicate real world objects, you know, and say, that's a plant, you know. This is a person talking, you know. There's a functional thing to language. It serves a purpose of being able to communicate information. But as a consequence of that, it has to classify things. And this is in part what I meant about the connection between language and programming. We are organising the information of the world into classifications so that we can speak of it. And so then we do that of ourselves too. And the labels that we get, there are many and varied. And they come in and out depending on context, as in where they are used. You know, if somebody is trying to describe someone they saw at the scene of a crime that involves someone of 37 years of age, they might talk about, you know, how high they were. Were they tall? Were they short? What kind of hair did they have? You know, what the colour of their skin was. If there was some other identifying features, some other labels, can we throw more labels on there? And there is a problem with all of this labelling, is that we confuse the label for the reality. You are not your name. You are not your height. You are not your occupation. You are not the colour of your skin. You are not where you live. You're not how old you are. Did I say that already? You are none of these things. Not really. Any more than the boundary between, I don't know, Italy and France is real in any meaningful sense. I didn't pick the UK because the UK has this thing that it's an island. So you can say, well, look, but even there, the barriers of, you know, a nation off their shore, it gets complicated. All right, the line between England and Wales, England and Scotland, they're not meaningful, not really, not in a cosmic sense. They're meaningful in a human society sense, civilization sense. Our civilization makes use of these labels. That's how we know if you were born in Italy or you're born in France. But the lines on a map are not reality. Reality is just there anyway, right? We could build a barrier, but the barrier is in a sense a symbol as well. I find it interesting that there's a point where there's a blurring between spoken language and artifacts that we create. You know, I was thinking like a motorway. It's like we say motorway, we draw the lines on the map of a motorway, and then there is the actual motorway. You could almost think of the existence of this motorway as being some kind of human statement. It's just a different kind of language, but anyway, I digress. So it gets a bit of a problem. It gets to be a bit of a problem when we use these labels and we give them more weight than the reality. Nowhere do you see this more these days than in social media. You see, when people are sort of, I guess they're bored. I mean, because that's why they spend so much time on social media, myself included. There must be some kind of boredom thing going on around here. I've got to occupy their time. And so people occupy their time increasingly in these virtual activities in a form of complex communication, a different kind of language, a language of symbols of a different kind, you know. In some ways quite sophisticated. I mean, if you look at trolls, for example, they have a very sophisticated language. They're all saying the same thing over and over again, but it's quite sophisticated in terms of the subtlety and complexity and reading between the lines. Or maybe not. But what you see in social media is the reduction of the human experience to easily speakable units. You see, rather than the unspeakable, because you see, the unspeakable is not really that useful, is it, in this domain, in this area? You know, if you're somebody who has an axe to grind and you want to grind it in public so that other people exclaim how good a grinder you are, axe grinder. You know, if you are doing that, then it really helps to focus on things that can be communicated easily. And you know, you're not going to go and talk about people in their full complexity. You're going to boil it down to something simple, something concise, something that communicates the idea, you know. And before you know it, you've got bigotry, because that's where the bigotry comes from. It's like when you see somebody who fits into a particular pattern, and then there's that is a pattern that is frowned upon by a group on social media, and will throw a label at you. And the label is used as a lazy shortcut to avoid actually facing the reality. So in America, for example, you get this with, liberals. They are much maligned, not by everybody, but they're much maligned by, let's say, the people who lean towards the right. And they can say very derogatory things about liberals. They're often people who are clamouring about freedom. You see, the freedom of the people, the freedom of... It's funny because the word liberal literally means freedom. I mean, it's all... He's a liberal. Libero. In Italian, the word libero means literally free. The Statue of Liberty. See? The Statue of Freedom. Liberty. How do we get from that to liberal being a derogatory term?